Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Joe Smith. Joe is well known around Chattanooga for his work with the YMCA's Community Action Program, or YCAP, the longest-running early intervention prevention program in the Southeast. Joe is also chairman of the Hamilton County School Board. Joe, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we get into your remarkable life journey, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Well, I mean, it's a cup of Joe.
A cup of Joe.
Thank you for the hot coffee.
Is that a every morning thing for you?
Oh, absolutely. I have to have that coffee to get me moving.
Yeah, and you just take it black, huh?
I take it just plain.
You're old school. I like
Old
that.
school.
Yeah. What, you drink it through the morning or?
Well, I'm about a 3 or 4 cup.
Are you really?
A morning guy.
And caffeinated
yeah,
too.
And caffeinated, yeah. And I
That
can't
explains a
drink
lot.
it at night, but I got a lot of energy, and I need a lot of energy.
Well, you do quite a bit, and looking at the information you sent me on your bio, that energy's gotten you through a lot of stuff. Well, let's talk about you. Were you born here in Chattanooga?
Well, I was born in Hamilton County,
Yeah.
Ohio.
Really, up Cincinnati
That's right.
area?
Cincinnati, it's Hamilton County. And
Wow.
That's where I was born. I didn't stay there long, Mike. When I was a 2-week-old baby,
Yeah.
and I have a sister who was 2 years old, we were adopted. And then we were brought to Chattanooga, Tennessee, raised by Bill and Minnie Lee Smith. That's Mom and Dad.
Oh, wow.
From the time that we were just babies. So when you get in,
particularly for you, at 2 weeks old.
right. And when you get into that story, then you kind of understand why I have such a love for kids that maybe have had it rough or been abandoned or maybe have gone the same journey that I've had to go through. So Chattanooga's home. I of course have been back to Cincinnati many times, but Chattanooga's home.
Well, talk about that a little bit. You're 2 weeks old. Your sister's 2 years old, and you're given up for adoption, I assume, by your birth parents?
Right. And what's very interesting, there was never any secret about that.
Yeah.
When we were very little, my mom, in fact, made a big deal out of it. Joe, you were adopted. We picked you.
Yeah, that's a big thing, isn't it?
Big thing. And she made a big deal out of it. We could have picked any kid in the world, but we picked you. So it was a big deal. Came home from school when I was 12 years old one day, and my mom said, "Would you like to meet your dad?" Of course, we'd like to meet our dad. Carried us down out to Rossville in kind of a tough, decrepit part of town, and walked in the house, and there was a fellow laying on the couch and drunk, cussing, dirty, and that was my dad.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was 12 years old, and I can remember leaving that house that day thinking, boy, I don't want to ever be like that.
What does that do to you at 12 years old? And I'm looking at kind of both things, Joe. Is one is how did your dad know to get in touch with the Smiths? Did he reach out? Did they find him?
He actually reached out to Minnie Lee, my mom, and asked for permission. He wanted to see us. And what was interesting, from the time that I was 12 till I was 16, he tried to have a relationship with us. He really did. But his alcohol would get in the way. For example, I'm going to come watch you play ball tonight. Yeah. Well, I'd be getting ready to warming up, getting ready for a basketball game, and I'd look in the bleachers. No, he wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Alcohol would get in the way. I'm going to pick you up Saturday. We're going fishing. Saturday morning would come around. He wouldn't show up. Alcohol would get in the way.
I would imagine at 12 years old, you really wanted to establish that bond with your birth dad.
Well, you did. You did. Now, Bill Smith, who was my dad, great man, a godly man that did all the right things, blue collar, hardworking. We never had a whole lot, but we had everything that we needed. And the Smith's house was full of love. But yes, you always had that longing. When I was 16, he died.
Yeah.
His name was Harold LaCroix. He died of cancer of the esophagus. What he really died of was years and years and years of alcohol abuse.
Yeah, that probably caused the cancer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, when I'm 18, I'm a senior at Red Bank High School, walking off the football field one Friday night. My sister comes sprinting out of the bleachers. I found her. I found our mother, really. Well, you got to remember, that's back in the early 70s. So back in those days, all those adoption files and stuff were sealed. And it's different today, but
and you didn't have the internet to do investigations.
Yeah, that's right, but she did. My sister, who by that time I'm 18, she's 20, and she found her. And where is she? Well, she's in Cleveland, Ohio. I want to go see her. I said, "You want to go?" Yeah, I'll go. So we go home. We tell our parents what we want to do. Back then, you didn't have cell phones, so you didn't have GPSs. You had this thing called a road map. Do you remember that?
I love a good map.
So we got in that car, and our parents said, "Now look, y'all got to stop about every hour and call us." Well, you had to find a phone booth.
Yeah.
You had to put a dime in that phone booth, to make a call. So we did that. Took us about 18 hours to get up there.
Wow.
And we found her. Walked up to the porch of this house and knocked on the door, and it was about midday on a Saturday.
Did she know you were coming?
No. This lady comes to the door, has a sheet wrapped around her. She's obviously nude. Told her who we were. I'm Joe. This is my sister, Barbara Sue. We're looking for Dosha Lee Croy. And this lady began to weep, tears running down her face. Oh, my goodness. And that was our mother. Talked to her maybe 5 minutes. She didn't invite us in. Very cold, short meeting. We got back in the car, and we drove back to Chattanooga. And my sister and I probably didn't say 10 words to each other in that 18-mile drive. But here's what I said to myself. I ain't never going to be like that. As it turned out, what we realized was that was just a drug house that she was staying in.
Oh, man. That's, I mean, at 12 years old to meet your dad and have that, lack of better description, disappointment than to meet your mom and kind of the same thing. So when you go back, does that draw you closer to your adopted parents?
I think that once again, I knew how we were loved, and because it was always a big deal, from the very first time that we walked in that house and been just a baby. So I knew that in spite of what I'd seen and where my biological roots were, that my real roots were with the people that had raised me and continued to love me.
Yeah.
But the real story begins there. Is I went off to college and like a lot of young people, get into the party scene. And Mike, it wasn't long till I was exactly like that man I saw on that couch and exactly like that woman. Dropped out of college.
Where were you going to college?
UT in Knoxville. I'm a Vol, still a Vol today.
I've seen you in some purple and gold, though.
Well, I love LSU too.
Yeah. Well, you had a good reason.
There's a story behind that.
And you had a good reason for that.
That's right.
But what were you studying? What did you want to be? And what was the initial
Well, I wanted to go in some type of sports medicine. I mean, I love sports. I've always loved sports. I went up there on a full scholarship, and I was a student trainer.
Oh, wow.
For the football team. That was during the Bill Battle days.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was a great experience, but it didn't last long.
Were you up there with Conridge Holloway, too?
I was there when Conridge Holloway. He was a freshman, yes.
Wow.
I knew Conridge very, very well. And, after 6 months, if you don't go to class and they don't know who you are, I can remember my roommate asking me right before Christmas, says, "Joe, we've been here 5 months and you ain't been to class yet." I said, "Well, I don't want to rush into things."
Did you and I have the same roommate?
So anyway, Mike, I ended up felling out of UT, and I came back home, and my parents decided that the problem was all those friends that I had up there in Knoxville and too much partying. So I came back home and I went to UTC for a while. The interesting part, those friends moved with me. Now they had different names, but it was the same kind of people. Because that's who I chose. So I'm trying to fast forward through this, but ended up getting married as a very young man. And
how old were you when you got married?
21.
That is young.
21. Paula and I, my wife, Miss America.
Miss America.
We really grew up together. She was my best friend's little sister. She was just his little sister. And then when I went off to college and came back home, and I didn't see her for about a year, and then all of a sudden she wasn't the little sister anymore. And so we've known each other all our life, but got married very, very young, started a family very, very young. Yeah. And all the while, I was doing a lot of partying. But by the time I was 25 until I was 32, I lived to use and used to live. And ended up just like that man I saw on the couch as a 12-year-old little boy, and that woman on that front porch when I was 32, and drugs and alcohol destroyed my life.
So prior to getting married, you were in school. Were you also working at all at this time?
I was in the insurance business and did very well. I got kind of a gift of gab. I was a salesman. I could sell about anything. Yeah. And so I did very, very well in the insurance business.
So you get married and you have your kids, but you've got a substance abuse problem.
That's right.
And you're selling insurance the whole time.
I'm selling insurance the whole time. Yeah.
Well,
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I call it baptism by fire.
Yeah.
I went through all that, and I know it was God preparing me to
what were those days like?
What's eventually become, my life's work.
Well, and of a lot of people we talk to, your early years form a lot, but in knowing you, your early years really formed who you are today.
Well, there's no question. Yeah. There's no question. And again, I think in going through all that, and again, I always refer to it as baptism by fire. It was God preparing me for what He had in mind for me, that's been my life's work. Those were tough years.
So 25 to 32, 7 years, you're working insurance, you're partying too much.
All the time.
I mean, what was a typical day like for you? I mean, were you focused on work in your family, or was it the pull of whether it's alcohol or whatever?
Well, you got to the point, again, where you had to have the drug to live.
Yeah.
So that's why I often say live to use and use to live.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And my drug of choice was cocaine, which is a amphetamine, if you will. But I got to the point at age 32 where the drugs didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And it didn't give me the effect I needed, which was the will and the ability to get after it, go to work every day. But at the same time, I couldn't stop. So I was a miserable, miserable man at age 32.
What changed things for you? I mean, did Paula say something's got to change?
It came down to that. She had enough. I mean, the drugs caused me to lose my insurance business. The home had been foreclosed. My houses had been repossessed. So from a material realm of things, we lost everything we had.
So You're in your early 30s, and basically everything's falling apart. And the reason I bring up that age is we've got a lot of listeners who are in their 30s and trying to grow their careers that, you get to a point to where you think you've hit a brick wall, and you really did.
I absolutely did. And again, we lost everything that we had of material realm of things. Lost all my friends. My family wanted nothing to do with me. And they were right. They shouldn't have wanted anything to do with me. And
that's your parents and your sister?
They love me. Yeah. They love me, but they wouldn't give me money anymore. They wouldn't enable me anymore. They learned how to do all the right things.
Yeah.
And Paula was a little bit harder sell. She hung in there and kept doing things. And then she got to the point to where I knew that she was about to leave. She was preparing to leave.
Yeah.
And I'm miserable, Mike. I couldn't stop using, but the cocaine didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And, God creates all of us to be happy and joyous and free. That's what He wants for you. That's what He wants for me. That's what He wants for all of us. And if we're not happy and joyous and free, we're going to do something for relief.
Do you and I don't want to get too deep on this, Joe, but what do you think it was in you that wasn't happy, that was driving that? I mean, does it go back to being adopted? I don't know.
I think that could have been a piece.
Yeah.
But I was just looking for something to fill that void, and alcohol and drugs kind of robs your soul. You get to that point. Once again, the pain of whatever life issues had presented me, the cocaine wasn't numbing the pain.
Not anymore, huh?
But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop using, but it wasn't working anymore.
Oh.
So I write my wife a note, and I'm going to get some relief. I had a .45 caliber pistol in my vehicle, had a place picked out by Chickamauga Dam, and I was going to get some relief. On the way to go get some relief, my truck ran out of gas. So here I am. I've messed up everything in my life. Now I'm going to take my life. I can't even do that right. I messed that up. So I get out of that truck, slam the door, kick in the side, and I'm walking down Access Road because I'm going to get some gas and carry out my plan. And a guy comes by and says, "Sir, you need some help." That probably wouldn't happen today.
Yeah, it was a
You got to
different
remember,
time.
that was August 1st, 1987. And I said, "Yes, sir, I'm out of gas up here." And he said, "Well, get in. I'll take you to get some gas." So I got in the truck with that man, and he just began to question me. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I just need to get some gas." "Are you sure you're okay?" "Well, fella, you're mighty nosy. I just need some gas." And he said, "Why are you carrying that pistol?" He saw that gun in my pocket. Now, today, that might not be too unusual for somebody to be walking around with a pistol hanging out of their pocket. 1987, that was pretty unusual.
Yeah, you didn't see that.
Yeah, you just didn't. I don't know what happened that day, but I just poured my heart out to the guy. I just told him what I was doing. I said, "Buddy, my life's a mess, and my wife's going to leave me, and I'm going to go kill myself." That's what I told him. And he just began to talk to me, and he said, "Look, would you go talk to a friend of mine?" He said, "He's a doctor up in Soddy Daisy. Would you go talk to him?" He said all the right things. Yeah, I'll go talk to him. So he took me up to see Charles Clay. He's a physician.
Right now at that time.
At that very time. My truck's on the side of the road, on Access Road, and we went to Soddy Daisy to this doctor's office. He's deceased now, but Charles Clay was his name. Turned out he was a retired Marine that had experienced a drug problem of his own when he was in the Marine Corps, and he ended up being a physician. I went to see that guy, and boy, you talking about saying all the right things. And he convinced me to go into a drug rehab program where I stayed 6 months, and my life's never been the same.
Wow, 6 months.
Yeah.
That's long. Now, I want to go back to the guy who helped you. Is this someone you maintained a relationship with after that, or was it just a good Samaritan who?
Well, so let me tell you a story. And I get out of treatment, and I want to go thank the people that had been helping me. So the first place I went was to Dr. Clay, and I walked into his office up there that day, and, "Oh, Joe, you look great." I explained to him what had been going on, and thanked him for what he had done to get me to that place. I went to a place called Greenleaf that was out in Fort Oglethorpe. I think it's now the city offices out there. But anyway, I went to thank him, and I said, "Dr. Clay, I want to look that guy up that brought me up here to see you that day, and because I just want to thank him for what he did." He said, "Joe, I don't have any idea who that guy was. I've never seen that man in my life." Yeah, you're looking at me kind of weird there, Mike. It was an angel, is what it was.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
I mean, you
I don't know who it was. I don't know who it was.
Never at the time when he was helping you?
No. It was an angel.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So when I was in that treatment program during that 6 months, it's where God did a work in my heart, removed all the desire for drugs, developed a relationship with Jesus Christ, and my life's never been the same. I've never looked back.
How difficult was it for you when you got out of rehab to reestablish your life?
The biggest challenge was relationships, because what happens with the addict, with the alcoholic, is that you destroy relationships by lies, by deceit, by manipulation. So in reestablishing trust with family, with friends, that was the most difficult thing. You walk out and you have a lot of shame from mistakes and things that you've done, so you had to walk through all that. So I had a lot of support on the back end of that treatment experience. Recovery is not about just going through a program. Recovery is a lifetime experience. And, I tell people all the time, it's not called alcoholism. It's called alcoholism.
Yeah.
So it never goes
never leaves
away.
you. Yeah.
I hadn't had any drugs since 1987, but I'm a drug addict.
Yeah.
So there's no way that I can go back and experiment and party anymore because I could be right back where I was in 1987.
You brought up one thing, how it destroys relationships. I think it's probably very slow because people who love you want to help you and
give you chance after chance.
Yeah. So reestablishing that trust, how difficult was that?
It was tough. Now, the people that you win back the quickest are the ones you're closest to. I had broke Bill and Minnie Lee's hearts.
Yeah.
But that was the easiest relationship to build back. And life's about, people don't care so much about what you say. They want to see what you do.
It's what you do.
And so people just begin to observe me and watch my life. And so that really fast forwarded a lot of that relationship rebuilding.
Yeah. What did you do professionally when you got out? Because you lost your insurance business, and I would imagine, did you jump back into insurance?
Here's what was really funny about that, Mike. I didn't have a job, and I couldn't tell Paula I didn't have a job. I'd get up in the morning, and I'd put my shirt and tie on like I was going to work, and I'd go down to the AA club, what was called the Hickson Serenity Club. Still there today. It's a different location, but it's still there. And I would sit at the AA club all day. I didn't have a job, and nobody was going to hire me. I was a junkie. There wasn't nobody going to hire me, so I wouldn't go apply for a job, and I was really stuck there for a while. Mm-hmm. Well, Paula figured it out when I wasn't bringing home a paycheck that I didn't have a job.
Pretty quickly.
She figured that out. And so it was just a process. And I think the first job I had after going to treatment, I was helping a contractor. I was doing painting work and just construction work, just whatever I could do.
Whatever you could do.
Pick up $1. And then Chris Vass, I know Chris Vass, the editor down at Times Free Press. She was running a place called the Crossroads. The Crossroads was a residential treatment program for adolescents. And Chris Vass was the administrator. It was owned by HCA.
I didn't know she did that.
Yes. Again, this is back in the late 80s. Yeah. It was owned by Hospital Corporation of America, HCA, and she was the administrator. And a fellow that I knew and through AA was a counselor there, and he said, Joe, they're looking for third shift techs, and you need to apply. So I did. And I met with Chris, and I lied to her. She said, have you been clean a year? Well, yeah, I've been clean a year. Well, that wasn't true. And she probably knew that, but she took a risk with me.
How long had it been?
It'd been about 7 months, 8 months.
Like that. I'll round up to you.
Yeah. And I think Chris knew that because it was just a third shift tech. My job was at that time was really a security guard.
Yeah,
I walked up and down the halls of that little treatment program, making sure kids weren't sneaking out and they were doing what they were supposed to do. I was no more than a security guard at that time. But what I do, I knew that I loved that work and I loved working with kids, and I wanted to share my experience, strength, and hope with other young people that were going through what I had gone through, and I just had a hunger to help others and to share my story.
But before you discovered that with that job, I mean, was anything in your past where you thought that might be what you wanted to do, work with kids or anything like that, but it was really the experiences of your challenges that brought you to that?
I think that when I got into recovery and when I spent that 6 months down there at Greenleaf, that God did a work in my heart during that time and just gave me the desire and the hunger. And then I just had a personal realization that, I was abandoned as a young baby, and all the stuff that I've gone through related to drugs, and there is hope and there is a way to recover. And so I wanted to share that. So I just had a passion to want to do that. So I was a third shift tech. I'd get off, I'd go in at midnight, I'd get off at 7 in the morning, but then I would stay. And I'd go with those counselors, and I would go into their sessions, and I would go to group, and I'd listen, and I'd watch them, and I would learn. And I did that for about 2 years. And and then started working on my own certification, become a substance abuse counselor, and been working with kids and families ever since.
Where did that first job take you next?
I went to Peninsula Hospital.
Yeah.
Peninsula is located in Knoxville, and they had a place called the Lighthouse, which was down in Calhoun, Georgia. And I worked there for quite a while, and then it was owned by Bill Greer, is who owned that Peninsula chain at that time. And they ended up closing that place in Calhoun, laid off all the staff except for me. And he said, Joe, I want you to go with us to our main hospital up in Knoxville. And it was a dual diagnosis kind of place where they had kids that had a dual diagnosis, mental health issues and then substance abuse issues. And I worked there for a while, and I was really in a job that was way over my head. I was the program director, but I'm supervising doctors and nurses and working with these kids, and I was just over my head. I loved what I was doing, but I was over my head. And I went to him one day, and I said, Mr. Greer, and I was living in Knoxville in a hotel.
Okay.
And by this time, Andy, who you know, and my daughter Abby, they're just toddlers.
Right.
And my wife would either drive to Knoxville on the weekends, or I'd come to Chattanooga on the weekends. We looked for a house up there, never could find a house to move into, and it just wasn't meant for me to be there. And I went to Bill Greer one day, and I said, Mr. Greer, I just feel like I'm over my head. I want to go home. And he said, Joe, look, he said, we want to keep you. He said, would you go to Cleveland, Tennessee and start an outpatient program for us? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while, with that outpatient program there in Cleveland.
So this whole time you're building a new career.
Oh yeah.
But you're also rebuilding those relationships with Paula and your kids.
That's right.
And everyone else. So, and those couldn't have been easy times with you commuting back and forth to Knoxville, and fortunately you get back to Cleveland. But how difficult was that to do?
Well, Mike, I can remember up in Knoxville. I lived in a Holiday Inn out on the Alcoa Highway, right by the airport, and the Peninsula Hospital was down on the river, beautiful place out in the woods. But I remember a lot of afternoons leaving that hospital and going to that Holiday Inn, and Buddy shutting that door and covering my head up, crying myself to sleep. I mean, it was hard times, and I was doing what I loved to do. But again, I was in a job that I really wasn't qualified for.
But you had a passion to help.
I had a passion to do it, and I longed for Paula, and at that time, again, my kids were very young, and we had to pay the light bill. You know, we had to have income. And so that was a hard year till we got back to Cleveland and started that outpatient program, and that went really well for quite some time, all the way to 1998, and that's when the YMCA recruited me to come to work for them and start that YCAP program.
Well, and before we jump into YCAP, I want to go to the year, the year 1991. That's when you first started taking in foster kids?
Started taking in foster kids.
How many kids do you have?
Well, we always say we had 19 foster kids, which is really not true. And here's why that's not true. When we first started, we took in foster kids. Our first one, I'll tell you a quick story about her. Her name was Tika. She was, now I met her in the outpatient program in Cleveland. She had been abused by a mom's boyfriend. The courts intervened, put her in Baptist Children's Home. So my wife and I would go to Baptist Children's Home and get her on the weekend. So we were a visiting family where you go out to Baptist Children's Home, you get a child, take them home with you. They stay the weekend, you take them back. That's what we did with her. So we really got to know her very well. Christmas time, we're visiting her out there. We were taking her back, and her mom come to visit. And her mom's talking to her, trying to get her to retract her story about the boyfriend. Because the courts had said, Mama, you know, unless this boyfriend's out of the picture, you cannot get your daughter back. Well, she's trying to get the kid to retract her story, and the kid wouldn't do it. And so Mama says, if you don't retract your story, you'll never see me again. But Mama, it happened. So Mom backs out of the driveway. This kid's chasing her down the driveway. Mama, don't go. And Mama left. So the very next day, we went and applied for custody for her. So she was with us from the time that she was in the 9th grade till she graduated from high school. But that's how we got started doing foster care. But here's what happened, Mike. We realized we had several with her and after her, but the state of Tennessee was hard to work with. When kids go into state custody, the state of Tennessee don't make very good parents. They just don't. And, they're overworked, they're overwhelmed, and it's just hard when you got to jump through all these hoops and all the stuff that the state requires. So we started when we'd see a kid that had a need, we'd go to the mom or go to the grandmom. Let me raise that child.
Yeah.
And just have the parent or the guardian sign them over to us. So when we say we had 19 foster kids, we really only had about 9 foster kids. The rest of them were just kids that we'd have the guardians.
That you helped.
Because we didn't want the state involved.
Right. I could imagine that.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to a decision like that, to bring additional kids into your house, I mean, is that something you and Paula sat down and said, I really want to do this? Or how did that come about?
My work has been Paula's work. And you talking about a partner. I mean, everything that I've done or decided I felt like God was leading me into, man, she has been right there with me.
She's been your rock.
Unbelievable. And even today, even my own children, because Andy and Abby, my biological kids, they had to make tremendous sacrifice, if you will, in their lives as I'm bringing home all these stray kids. I don't think Andy or Abby, either one, had their own bedroom growing up.
Yeah.
They always had a foster kid, somebody in that bedroom with them. So they had to make a lot of sacrifices. But here, what's interesting, you look at what Andy, my son, is doing today, and it's just taking that program. So what that birthed in him, he has a love for people. Love for my daughter who lives in Florida now. Same way, her life has become a life of service and giving back. So
you raised him that way.
It reproducing myself.
Yeah,
I mean that that's what happened.
You reinvented yourself and you reproduced yourself.
That's exactly what happened.
And I looked to another year, like 1996, where you're nominated as Dad of the Year.
Yeah, and that was done by one of the foster kids that wrote a letter to the United States Olympic Committee and nominated me as a community hero.
Oh, what a great thing.
It was amazing. And it was through the Coca-Cola Company. They sponsored the torch relay, that carried the Olympic torch all over America, and it ended up in Atlanta.
Yeah, 96 was Atlanta.
Yeah. So she wrote a letter and nominated me for that, and I got to carry that Olympic torch. Yeah.
Well, and that's not your only tie to the Olympics. That's your first tie to the Olympics.
That was my first tie, yeah.
Now, let's get into YCAP. How did all that come about? You're doing the program in Cleveland, and
I was in the program there, and I had met the fellow that was the director of the Cleveland Family YMCA. Mm-hmm. He put me in touch with Bill Wetzel, who is a retired executive of the Chattanooga YMCA. It just out of the blue called me one day, said, I'd like to meet with you, and said, we want to start a youth delinquency prevention program. Would you be interested?
Was that an idea that originated in Chattanooga, or do all the Ys do that?
It started in Nashville, and it was a grant program through the state. A guy by the name of Jay Lawrence started in Nashville, but what they wanted to do was to replicate it in the major cities in Chattanooga. So Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. And so they asked me to start in Chattanooga. Now, what's interesting about YCAP is that a lot of those Ys no longer do YCAP, but Chattanooga has continued to. And, as much as I was able to do that program, if you look at it today and what my son Andy has done with it, he's just taking it to the next whole level. And they're seeing about 90 kids a day. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. 90,
yeah.
I started in 1998 with that program in North Chattanooga. Mm-hmm. Over here, Pat Newhoff, Pat, in that little office right next to him. That's where it started. And I had a $30,000 budget. That's what I had. And had 2 staff, me and one other guy. Unbelievable. Now, fast forward to today, they got over $1 million budget and probably 10 employees and seeing over 90 kids a day.
And Just give a brief description of what YCAP does.
Well, it works with kids. for lack of a better explanation, it's an early intervention prevention program. So you're identifying kids that are just beginning to struggle academically and or behaviorally. So it provides tutorial services, mentoring, individual counseling, family counseling, amateur boxing, an array of activities to address social, spiritual, mental development for adolescents.
And can you just apply to be in, or you have to be recommended?
Those kids are referred by a school counselor or maybe by a school administrator. A lot of them are referred by the juvenile court system. Mm-hmm. So, you got to have some referral mechanism. You can't just go down and knock on the door.
And you're wearing your USA Boxing pullover today. How did boxing become a part of YCAP? Because that couldn't have been in the blueprint from Nashville. That was something you brought to it, right?
Yeah, oh boy, that's a whole nother story. When Andy was about 10 years old, of course, we went through the little league baseball, all that stuff, that you go through with kids. And he was about 10 one day, and he come home from school, and he said, Dad, I want to learn how to box. Well, I didn't know anything about boxing. I was never a boxer. I mean, I got in a fight in a bar a time or two, but I didn't know anything about boxing. But I wanted to be a good dad.
Yeah.
And, Dad, I want to be a boxer. So I took him down to the late Skipper Fairbanks, who down in Red Bank, and Andy boxed for a little while. He didn't box long because he figured out that guy, he going to hit me back. He's going to hit you back. So he didn't box very long, but what I learned was I could reach a lot of street, tough, inner city kids through the sport of boxing that I couldn't reach any other way. And so Andy didn't box long, but I kept at it. I kept at it. And then ended up starting our own boxing program as a part of YCAP. It wasn't part of the YMCA at that time. And we started at the west side over at College Hill Courts is where that boxing piece started, and began to have some success. Andy's in high school by then, and he's coming back and helping me as a coach, and we're taking kids all over the country, and we're producing some champions.
So you're doing golden gloves?
Golden gloves and the silver gloves and all that stuff, and had some national champions, so started getting some recognition on the national level.
Why do you suppose boxing is such a great vehicle for reaching out to these lack of a better term, street kids, street kids?
A lot of these kids present with a lot of issues and hurt, abandonment, neglect, and then a lot of time all that is covered by anger. So now here's what we see. We see an angry little boy. Well, what is really going on? He's hurting and he's sad underneath all that anger. So if you can ever get past it, peel the onion, if you will, if you ever get past that layer of the onion, then where the anger, then you see the hurt and all the other feelings that are going on. So boxing's hard. I mean, it's hard. And not everybody can do it, but it teaches so great lessons about discipline, about hard work, about respect. And you take those lessons that you learn in that boxing gym into everyday life and into the classroom. And, sport in general does that. But for a boxer to be able to go in that gym and hit on that punching bag, and that may be the dad that abandoned him as he's hit that punching bag, or that may be we don't have any food in the house as he's punching that bag, or that may be the electricity's turned off. Whatever the number of issues they may have been through, what a great way to channel that anger into something positive. And
it also gives them something to focus on that their peers really respect.
No question. Suzanne Bailey, I don't know if you ever remember Suzanne. She was a juvenile court judge many years ago before the great judge we have now, Rob Villiard. Yeah. And Suzanne, the kids would have something happen, end up in juvenile court because they're getting in fights at school. And, and she would refer kids to me. You got to go see Joe Smith and get in his boxing program. And people would go, wait a minute. So you got a kid that's getting in fights and you're sending him to Joe Smith to learn how to fight. Well, you got to understand. No, it's not. We don't even call it fighting. It's boxing. Yep. It's a sport. It's not fighting.
It's a
You're
discipline.
Not a fighter. You're a boxer. So it's very, very different. But you take that energy, that anger, and channel it in a positive way, and then great things happen.
You talked a bit about how anger presents itself, really covering up for all the other issues.
Right. That's right.
And Susie and I have been privileged to be involved with YCAP for a bit. Yeah. And I tell people this all the time is that what you understand when you see those kids, like when we come and serve dinner, and the kids, and they're just being 10, 11, and 12-year-old boys in that safe environment.
That's right.
But when they go home, they got to be the man of the house. And that's where that creates a lot of, it doesn't give them a chance to be a little boy, but YCAP does.
Yeah. So important to understand that for most of us, when we were growing up, our monsters were pretend. Okay? It was the boogeyman under the bed. These kids today, so many of them, their monsters are very real. Monsters are real. And they go home this afternoon, and the electricity's been turned off. There's no food in the refrigerator. Daddy's gone. They don't even know who Daddy is. Mom's bringing these men in the house, and they're going in the back bedroom, and they're smoking weed. Or Mom's bringing in a boyfriend that's beating her up, abusing her. And these kids are seeing all this stuff, and they got to get up in the morning and go concentrate on algebra.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, Mike, when we want to talk about, the schools aren't doing their job, the teachers aren't doing their job. The problem ain't the schoolhouse. The problem's the house.
Well, and that leads into why you're, in my opinion, uniquely qualified to be on the school board, and you're now chairman of the school board. From your perspective, how does all that connect for you? Having started YCAP, I know you turned it over to Andy.
Yeah. But, I've started something similar. I hope we'll have a minute to get into. In understanding what these kids are going through and over the years building so many relationships with teachers and principals because of my work at YCAP and just having a heart for Hamilton County Department of Ed to be the best public education system in our great state. And it's been a challenge. I'm into my 9th year.
Gosh, has it been 9 years?
It's been 9 years.
Wow.
And probably it's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
Because you just can't please everybody. No matter what you do, seemingly it's the wrong thing to do. But we've done some great things here in Hamilton County, and we've got a lot of work to do. But we've done a lot of great things in those 9 years that I've been over there.
And to your point, it may be the most thankless elected office there is.
It is, and that's why I often say it's the hardest thing that I've ever done, because you make a decision to do something, and some people are going to be pleased with that decision. Some people are not. So there's just no way to. Hamilton County is, we are the largest county in terms of square miles in the state. Now, we're not the largest in terms of the number of students. Mm-hmm. We're the 5th largest now. Murfreesboro just surpassed us in terms of the number of students. But so we're the 5th largest. But from a square mileage standpoint, we're the largest. So think about that, from one end of the county all the way to the northern end. That's a long ways.
And a lot of differences.
There you go. So you've got inner city schools, you've got suburban schools, you've got urban schools, you've got all different kinds of cultures and belief systems and ideologies. And so no matter what you do, somebody's going to be upset. It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. It's a hard work.
Well, you're very good at it.
Well, you're mighty kind.
Yeah, and speaking of good at it, you turned over YCAP to Andy. Andy's, as you said, taking it places it hasn't been.
2017, I'd been at YCAP for 19 years, and I really wasn't ready to retire, but I knew that Andy was ready to take it over.
Yeah.
And, there was people all over the county that was, Andy, we want to hire you. Won't you come to work for us? In fact, he did for a while, and he coached football over at McCall for a little while. And he was ready, and I wasn't really ready to retire, but I knew he was ready, so I went ahead and retired. And I had a sailboat at that time, and my wife and I got on that boat, and we took it down the Tennessee River, Tom Bigby Waterway, Gulf of Mexico. And we lived on that boat for about a year and a half, and all up and down the west coast of Florida, Keys, Bahamas. I mean, we had a blast for a year and a half. And I'd have to come home often I was on the school board and doing school board stuff. And in 2018, the day after Thanksgiving, after a year and a half of being on that boat, we're coming home to Chattanooga on a Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. And I said, honey, I've enjoyed this year and a half, but I think God wants me to go back to work. Mike, she just began to weep, and she said, I've been feeling the same thing. And I said, well, let's just pray and see what God's up to. That was on Friday. The following Monday, I got a call from Jim Hammond. He was the sheriff at the time. And Sheriff Hammond said, Joe, have you ever thought about coming out of retirement? I said, well, we've been thinking about it for 2 days. And so I met with him and ended up taking over as the director of Prison Prevention Ministries, a ministry that had been around now for over 45 years. And so I took that ministry over, and it's a ministry that does a lot of work in the jails and the prisons and helping inmates as they transition out of their time, reentry, get a job, place to live, and, working with those inmates. Well, and then, by the way, kind of a side note here, Paula ended up going back and teaching preschool that she still does today. So she felt like God wasn't done with her either. And neither one of us really we don't need to work, but, we just love.
You don't need to sit around either.
I can't sit around. I tried that. It was okay for about a year and a half, and I was ready to go back to work.
I can understand that.
So the pandemic hit. This is important. The pandemic hit. And we can't get in the jails. We can't get in the prisons. So they won't let us in there, do the pandemic. So we just didn't have anything to do with the ministry. And I'm on the school board, and I'm getting calls from principals. Joe, we're in virtual learning, but these kids are not signing up. They're not doing their virtual learning. Allison DeYoung, who's the principal at Middle Valley Elementary, she called me, and she said, Joe, I've got kids that aren't doing their virtual learning. And I said, well, why don't you find me about a dozen of them? I'll pick them up. And I'll bring them to the church, and we'll make sure that they're doing their virtual learning. So that's what we did. That was during the pandemic. And then when they went back to school, then we made the decision, you know what, let's just start another YCAP kind of program. And so that's what we did, and it has just taken off.
And what's it called?
It's called InZone, INZONE. And it operates under the umbrella of Prison Prevention Ministries, which is now called Transform Ministries, because we are doing so many other things besides just the prison work. Now, we're back in the jails and back in the prisons doing that piece, but we're doing prevention stuff in the schools. And then we added a boxing piece. We call it Jabbing for Jesus.
Love it.
And we partner with Abba's House, big church out in Hickson, where all these services takes place. So we're seeing about 40 kids a day at that location, and just continuing to work. So, Mike, I'm going to finish strong. I'm 71. I don't look 71.
No, you don't.
Some days I feel it, but, I just love the work, and I want to continue to serve as long as I can, and just love on folks.
Well, you've got a passion for helping people when they're at their lowest.
That's right. And I had so many that helped me, that
well, you're paying it forward.
Didn't give up on me. Yeah.
I've got one more question for you, but before I get to it, I do want to thank Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring our podcast. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. Last question, Joe, and this may be a little different for you, but, in talking to you, your passion's obvious and you're wanting to help people. And you've seen both sides of life, the pursuing good times, pursuing money, pursuing things, and you've also seen it all go away. So what would you tell that 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Well, it's got to begin with God first, and a personal relationship with his son, Jesus Christ, who died for my sin and yours. I think that's critical, and because that shapes your eternity. And then family, of course, and then giving back. I joke about being 71, but here's what I know about that. This ain't home. for any of us. It's just not. And when I turned 60, for some reason that birthday bothered me a little bit. I may have told you this story before. If I have, forgive me. But I looked myself up in a mortality table when I was 60, and 60 years old, Caucasian, Southeast. Looked myself up, and I realized at age 60 that it was about 80% over.
Yeah.
So I'm in the fourth quarter. I'm late. I may be in overtime now. I don't know. but why is that important? Why is it important to understand that? The reason it's important is because every single day, all of us ought to be finding somebody to love on. Just finding somebody to love on. Just one. Just one every single day, because this ain't home. We ain't going to be here long. We're just passing through. Let me tell you one quick story.
Sure.
I know we're out of time. You asked about boxing. 2008, I was the team manager of the USA Olympic boxing team. And it was really a God thing. I don't know how I got there, but I did as a coach. Here's a guy that never boxed in his life, but he ends up being an Olympic coach. So how's that happen?
I mean, that's a miraculous story
It's a God
to begin
thing.
with.
It's a God thing.
Yeah.
It's the opening ceremony. We're getting ready to march into the stadium, and it's emotional. You're representing.
This is where?
This is in Beijing, China. And I'd been with those kids for a year leading up, getting ready for the Olympic Games, and wondered why I was there. Well, I found out real quick why I was there. It wasn't because I was a great coach. It's because I had 11 young men on that Olympic team. 9 of them didn't have a dad. They were from all across the country. They didn't have a dad. That's why I was there that year with those boys. But anyway, we're getting ready to march into the stadium, and they told us that as you march into the stadium, you walk halfway around, you look up and acknowledge your president sitting up there, And so we're getting ready to go in. I look over to my left, and there's the late Kobe Bryant. And I'm pretty smart, Mike. I knew if I'd go over and walk in that stadium by him, I'd be on TV because I knew they'd be showing him. So I go over there by him, and he is weeping. And I don't mean just snot slinging and cry. So I patted him on the back, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he couldn't speak. "Are you okay?" Well, he finally got his composure, and he said to me, he said, "Yeah, man, I'm okay. I'm representing America in the Olympic Games." Well, that gave me permission to feel. And we began to march in that stadium, and here's what happened. Everything went into slow motion. And I began to look up in those bleachers. Now, check this out. And I look up there, and I see my dad, Bill Smith, sitting up there. And he'd been dead for 15 years. But there he sat, plain as I'm looking at you. I looked a little bit further, and there was Mama Housley, my grandmother. And when I was mired in that cocaine addiction, everybody else had given up on me, but boy, Mama Housley never did. She never gave up. She prayed for me, and she loved me all through that. I look over, and I see Miss Posey, a third-grade teacher. Miss Posey had been dead for years, too. Miss Posey was the meanest woman I ever saw. She was. She rode a broom to work every day. But she loved me, and she poured into me. I've never forgot that. As a third-grade little boy, I've never forgot that. As I look in those bleachers, I'm seeing person after person after person that somehow had affected my life to get me to that point. They're in my bleachers. I saw Jesus Christ himself in my bleachers, sitting in my bleachers, smile on his face. Here's the application. Staying home. We was passing through. We are. So if we understand that truth, then isn't it important that every single day we're crawling up in the bleachers of somebody's life and just loving on folks? And all my life, 71 years, I've been having people crawl up in my bleachers. And as long as I'm breathing, I'm going to crawl up in the bleachers of others and give back. Because you don't keep what you have unless you give it away.
What an inspirational message. And I can't add anything to that, Joe, except thank you for coming in and talking to me.
Well, it's been a great day. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.